The topic for today's podcast is the metaphysics of climbing. And in order to do a serious topic like that justice, we're going to have to meander our way through quite a lot of background thoughts.
I want to buy 1,000 people for a year.
Yeah.
And control all of their behavior.
Yeah.
Science doesn't work like a courtroom. And it definitely doesn't work like, here's my peer review paper, now where's your peer review paper? Look, if you want to be part of the human centipede, who am I to judge? And then you have some fucking Reddit nerd that's like, well, you know, in the laboratory, that doesn't seem to work. It's like, dude, my biceps are bigger than yours. Why would I listen to you?
So when we are a Kardashev 2 civilization, like science-based climbing YouTube, it's going to be lit.
You will find someone who's happy to wear science as a skin suit and take your money.
It's not going to be like taking the boner pill.
No. I know. Well, this is where it's going with it. This is where it's going with it. You could buy an entire research career of salamanders for what it would cost you to get a dead person's arm.
You lick the frog in the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, totally.
Some weird things happen.
As much as I might, want to, I can't actually poke electrodes around inside human eyes. The fundamental problem is you don't have to abdicate all the ways you know shit. Don't have to be abdicated to science.
And when they
I'm a scientist. I love science. I love it so much. I've given up basically every other thing that humans value. It's not a piece of evidence presented to a judge. It's a recipe presented to a chef.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Oh, if I get too close, he's gonna icicle death finger me. It's like, no, dude, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about this goofy bitch and his icicle fingers.
He's like, I don't want to mess with these.
I think it's even a deeper thing. It's more like in the absence of rigorous scientific knowledge, how do you create a model of the world that has predictive value?
Well, how do you create any model of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so why are we talking about this? Because a recurring question that I'm getting in the comment section on YouTube is, show me the evidence.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, before we get to the evidence for a lot of training recommendations or thoughts or ideas that we have, we need to first talk about models of reality, models themselves, the scientific process, and then how evidence itself is collected and synthesized and evaluated.
Yeah.
That's the framework here,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, yeah.
So let's start with models.
The problem with reality is that it's hard to break it apart and study it in a systematic fashion. So in order to understand something, you have to understand how much variability exists in terms of what you might observe in some system you're interested in, right?
If I was trying to describe, a model at its most basic, I would suggest that the complexity of whatever objective reality exists is incomprehensibly vast from a human perspective.
Yeah.
And so we work in simplifications. Like everything we know about anything is a simplification.
Yeah.
It's
totally.
a model. All human knowledge is a model.
Yeah.
And I think what I want to get to is that our models, those simplifications, are extreme.
Yeah, especially in terms of, in some cases we've pulled enough away from the system that we can study, the bits that remain are the important parts of it. They explain the most variance in the system. And you can look at them and you can run them through, different extreme and you can sort of say, for this system, here's the broad repertoire of like what you might observe.
Like what would an example be?
So from my work, I would say we know that there are two important processes that underlie like the generation of like an action potential in a neuron. One is the inward conductance of sodium, and the other is the outward conductance of potassium. And using different drugs, we can explore a lot of the voltage and time dependence of those conductances. And you could make a model. You could say, all right, well, I've looked at the behavior of this protein or this conductance under a number of different voltages and with a number of different, time dependent.
Okay, this is good. This is good because nobody understands what the fuck you just said. Like none of it, right?
Yeah.
Not a word of it, unless you happen to work in this particular field.
Right.
But it's a great example, okay? Because, so what have you talked about? You've talked about ion flux across a membrane.
Yeah.
You've talked about, voltages.
Yeah.
You've talked about proteins.
Yeah.
Okay. Every one of those concepts itself is a model,
Yeah, totally.
right? Because your concept of a protein.
Yeah, is sort of, in my head, if I think of a protein.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the sort of three-dimensional thing that you'd see in like a textbook. Of course, a real protein is not like that. It's this disgusting goo.
Well,
with certain areas of like certain areas that tend to extrude water or like water, or
right.
Certain areas where they tend to reduce ions or oxidize ions, but like that's sort of a cloud.
Yeah, but so what you're saying is that at the chemical level,
yeah,
it's just a cloud of charged interactions,
Yeah.
occurring in a messy, incomprehensible fashion.
You'd have to describe it as something like with statistical mechanics, not as
Well, I mean, eventually,
what's in my head, which
right.
is like basically a shape, right?
Exactly. And so then why do you use a shape in your head? Because the protein is not a shape. Or at least it's not that simplification that you're using. You're using a model of a protein.
But I have to cut away the
yes,
reality.
you have to simplify it
Yeah.
to something that is functionally useful.
Right. And in terms of like what's valuable for me when I do an experiment or whatever, very little of the reality of the protein matters.
Exactly.
Like
what you want to know is you want to form a model that can make predictions
yeah.
and so you want to be able to run an experiment and predict the result.
Right.
And if you get a prediction that fits your model,
right.
then it's a good model. If you get a prediction that doesn't fit,
yeah.
you have to now you have to either evaluate whether the experiment itself was valid,
Right.
or you might have to revise your model.
Right. And
Right.
the model the Hodgkin-Huxley model describing the behavior and action potential, I think they didn't even know what
What did you call that?
The Hodgkin-Huxley model of an action potential which is like 1952-ish, I think, that they won the Nobel Prize for it. At that time, they didn't even understand at all, I think, the underlying proteins.
Right.
That they were just like, these are ion conductances.
Right.
We don't know how they get there. We don't care. I think there was one argument is that they just floated through the cell wall. I don't even, at that point, and I could be wrong about this, I don't care enough to have it like cemented in my head. For sure, the underlying proteins weren't known. And I don't think it was clearly known that they were proteins. They were protein channels in the membrane that conducted ions through. At that point, like those were, I think it was 10 or 15 years before that was discovered, right?
All right. So,
But mathematically, the model's great.
yeah.
I still use it today.
Yeah.
80 years later.
Yeah. And still, yeah. And so you're like, what the fuck does this have to do with climbing? Well, we're getting there.
Slowly.
Slowly.
There's a lot of meandering. It's too nice out here to cut a direct line.
Yeah, we're not going straight there. Because,
yeah.
I mean, we could go straight there and then you'd be like...
Yeah, duh.
Yeah. Okay, so, Ben, you are a working scientist.
Yeah.
In the lab.
Yeah.
Running experiments.
Yeah.
What is science? Okay, and why do I ask this? What? Let's back this up. I want to frame this. There's a lot of science, and I put that in quotations, so because otherwise Ben will get mad at me.
Dude, I am gonna,
I'll trigger him. This serene setting's not enough.
Yeah, it's not. I'll fully revert, dude. I'll rage out.
Yeah, a lot of what.
I dare you to say, trust the science, motherfucker.
Yeah. Well,
I double dare you.
Yeah. So there's science in the way that you may understand it, and then there's this other thing that is commonly called science.
So science is an approach to knowing about something.
Yeah.
Right. And there are lots of little facts that can come into an existence when you study something, right?
Yeah.
And the important part of science, a real science, like the legit science shit, is you take those facts and you sort of smash them together into a synthesis, and then use that synthesis, that model,
that's why we're talking about models.
Yeah, to form predictions. And then you say, my model predicts that when we do this to the system, it will behave this way, right? And then you do that and you see what happens. And if the model's wrong, the model has to go away or change or whatever. Like that's science is like the testing of models. And the problem is that a lot of stuff that has kind of like worn science as a skin suit has made it so the models that they propose can't ever really be tested. And they get really mad when you say, well, how would I test your understanding of the world? They say, well, you should never test it. You should just believe me. Or it's in a paper. It's been peer reviewed. So that's the evidence. And it's like, well, you know. And here's what's frustrating about it is someone will sort of say like, well, here's my evidence. And they'll say it's a peer-reviewed paper.
Yeah.
And well, where's your evidence? And they present it as like a court case where if my evidence is more than your evidence, then I win. And it's like, well, that's not how I understand. And like most of my day job is, a reasonable part of my day job is breaking papers, right? So I get a paper and I try to replicate it, because I think it's cool as fuck. And that involves sort of trying to break it apart, trying to see, you know, the paper is a model and I try to see exactly what's going on. And so that doesn't mean, you know, Redditors, I read the abstract and I read the conclusion and maybe I read a little bit of the intro or maybe I got ChatGPT to read it for me. That means I went through the methods line by fucking line and I did exactly what they said and I made it into reality. Like if the methods section was a recipe to bake bread, I baked the bread. Right? If you read the abstract on PubMed, you didn't bake the fucking bread. I baked the bread. I know how it was done.
You know,
right?
and you know what? That's where we need to go, because what we're going to talk about is baking that bread.
And
what it would mean to bake the kind of bread that people are often asking us to bake in the climbing realm.
Right. And again, I want to sort of reiterate, science doesn't work like law does. And I think you've been hitting a lot of YouTube comments that are acting like the audience is a judge, and you are one lawyer, and they are the opposing lawyer.
Yeah. And like I'm going to debate. I can debate science with some other fucking YouTuber.
And they say, present your evidence. Here's my evidence. Right? And science doesn't work like that. Science doesn't work like a courtroom, and it definitely doesn't work like here's my peer-reviewed paper. Now, where's your peer-reviewed paper? Right? If you show me a peer-reviewed paper, I can just look at it and say, well, your methods are bad. Logically, your methods are bad, or even it's even worse than that. It's like I can look at it and say, this is skin suit science. I choose. It's a waste of my time to engage in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and that's most of my day is trying to figure out what science.
You're not even going to bake that cake because it's too,
It's a shit cake.
You look at the recipe. Like you as a scientist can look at the recipe. And one cake has sick real butter, and one cake has some gnarly ingredients that one cake calls for dog feces.
Well, it's not even dog feces. It's like one is canola oil and one is like sick butter, and you're like, okay, well, I know what's happening here. One recipe understands that the person doesn't have enough fucking money for like butter, and it's like, well, what we'll do? What could we possibly do to make a cake-ish substance? And the other's like, no, we're making the best cake imaginable, right? And so like, I can just look at the recipe that says dump the canola oil in and say like, well, I don't even want that cake. I renounce that cake.
Right. And so I can tell you, this comes up a lot, right? A lot of the literature around exercise physiology, you can look at the methods, and I don't need to read anything more.
Science is a way of solving a problem and giving other people a recipe where they could solve the same problem and get the same result, right? Fundamentally, that's what it's doing. It's saying, like, you might be interested. I was interested in ion channels. This particular one, in this very small, controlled situation, behaves like this. If you're also interested in ion channels, you might try an experiment that was like this or a slight deviation on it, and I bet you get the same result. That's all we're doing.
Right.
There's nothing special there. It's we did this, it looked like this, you could do that too. And then tacked onto it, there's some sort of like, interpretation, but that's not the core part of science. The core part of science is the methods where we did this, we saw this. If you like doing that type of thing, you could do that thing too. Now, that works really well if you want to study certain things that we know how to control. And you could study those things in sufficient numbers to like create a model where when other people try to replicate it, they get the same thing you do.
Yeah.
Right? So in the early days of like vision research, we used salamanders, and salamanders are cheap. You can use 1 million of them. You can just throw them in the freezer. They hibernate. They're the easiest thing to deal with. I'm not gonna, rat out any people who retired, but like, you could. Salamanders are robust. Let me say that. And I'm not shitting on science. Like, look.
You just throw them in the freezer?
You just throw them in the freezer. They hibernate. They're fine. They wake up.
You're just like, I'm done with the salamanders, into the freezer? like a loaf of bread.
You buy, I think you buy, so what you do is you buy, and I could be getting this wrong, like this is, my boss was telling me, okay, but you would buy from some guy, so originally,
a salamander dealer?
Originally my boss would be, he was at Berkeley at the time, and his boss would say, okay, I'm going to send you down to New Mexico, and you just hang around in New Mexico, and there's I can't remember if he had to like dig the salamanders out of a swamp or like, I think it was a bait shop. There was like a New Mexico bait shop that sold salamanders by the hundreds. And it was like, okay, buy 2,000 salamanders and fly them back to Berkeley, California in your luggage, or drive them back or whatever. Get the salamanders back here, and then we'll, throw them in the fridge. And
a year's worth of salamanders.
You had a year's worth of salamanders. Which, if you're a grad student, you're like, well, this is pretty nice, a little road trip. Buy some salamanders.
In reality, you're probably breaking several state import laws.
Well, but this
you're smuggling salamanders.
At this point, it was probably the early to mid 70s, 78, 79 or whatever. I think it was still, as far as I know, it was still chill at that point.
All right.
Statute of limitations has passed.
But why are we talking about salamanders?
Okay, the point is that salamanders, you can get it for cheap. They're super robust. Actually, it turns out they're really good for studying retinas because they have gigantic cell bodies, and you can stick electrodes into them wherever, and they're really easy to work with. They're totally happy at room temperature, so you can you can study the normal behavior of the retinas at room temperature. That's all good. They're great fucking things to study. They're not the greatest model for humans because, of the obvious.
yeah. They have a tiny little reptilian eye.
Well, they're amphibians, and they're cold-blooded, and humans operate at approximately 37 degrees.
Well, and there's like 350 million years of evolution.
Yeah. Diverging.
Diverging.
Now, don't get a reptilian eye or a salamander eye and a human eye actually look pretty similar in their raw structure. So you can learn a lot about how human eyes work from salamander eyes. But at some point, you got to switch to at least a warm-blooded thing.
A mouse eye.
A mouse eye, right? So, okay, what's the point here? The point is that when you build a model, one thing you have to consider is the expense of creating your model.
Yep.
Right?
That's where we're actually going.
Yeah, and it turns out
we're starting in your realm. We're transitioning to mine.
And it turns out salamanders are cheap, so you can build a really good model of how salamander eyes work. Humans are expensive, horrendously expensive. Hiring them to demo your house is expensive. If you want to do experiments on them,
buying their dead bodies is expensive.
Right.
Have you looked at how much it costs to get a full cadaver?
I actually don't know.
It's tens of thousands.
So that's right on the border where you're.
I mean, you can buy parts, though, right? Like you could buy cadaver eyes for less.
Yeah.
But even buying an arm
Yeah.
is thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, I know, but you're talking 2,000 salamanders.
Yeah.
So that's 4,000 eyeballs. That's 4,000 eyeballs.
You could buy
from a bait shop in New Mexico.
Right. You could buy an entire research career of salamanders for what it would cost you to get a dead person's arm.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one arm.
Yeah.
That's N of one. So like, yeah, you're definitely building a great model of how salamander eyes work.
It's not fresh either.
Yeah, in comparison to a
it's preserved, right?
Formaldehyde.
Getting it fresh.
A single formaldehyded human arm. So like, and this is the problem. This is the problem we're getting at when we're trying to study human exercise, right?
Yeah, that's where we're going.
So what we're doing is we're saying that in the hierarchy of things that are like scientific and also, so physics and chemistry, it's a little bit easier to say when your model of reality is like right or wrong.
Your statistical models are.
You have a lot less statistics, right?
A lot less, and there's noise, but compared to the noise that you get in the higher level systems,
yeah,
it's just like
minuscule.
It's multiple orders of magnitude less noisy.
Right, 100%. And I can tell this because like, if you're studying neurons, you study everything from like the raw physical reality of opening and closing of ion channels. That is physics. Right? There's, those openings and closings are just, it's physics. It's the physics of like living stuff. And we know very precisely how that works. And then as you get into a whole neuron, those openings and closings start to drive more complex and less understood behavior.
Interactions, yeah.
Yeah, and then you get circuits of neurons and whole, areas of brains, and like that. Well, that's the transition into like the stuff you understand, right?
Right, exactly.
Like where your models of the world exist.
Well, we're working at the highest macro scale, like
totally.
The entire organism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you move from low-level bench research, like where you're working on models of like individual cells, all the way up to what I do, which is basically administering pharmacological agents to living creatures.
Yeah.
And it's basically it's practical applied pharmacology.
Yeah,
was what you'd say, right? That's the job. You take somebody, you render them unconscious so that they can have, all variety of surgical procedures, and then you have to
wake them back up.
You have to wake them back up at the end. Yeah. So the point is, I'm looking at a system that has an insane amount of complexity because it is the entire organism, and I'm working at a very high level.
Yeah, totally.
And so what happens there is that I have a model that I use of how I understand how things work, and that model so high level and so far removed from what's actually happening, but that doesn't actually matter as long as I can get the predictable results, consistent, safe, predictable results.
Right. And if you were in the middle of knowing too much detail, actually, reduces your ability.
There's a level at which that you can't keep it all in your working memory, and
it just doesn't matter. It just gets abstracted away.
It gets abstracted away.
When you're putting something to sleep, I assume I don't know, but like every decision you make is not you sort of calculating the latest peer-reviewed research on
not at all.
Whatever drug you're using and dosing and whatever. It's like
there's a tiny percentage of that.
Yeah,
and that's relatively new.
Right. In my life, I've seen other situations that look exactly like this.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I did this, and it worked out. It worked out, and
and so exactly.
Even in your situation where you're dealing literally like with life and death, you don't actually use peer-reviewed research, as far as I can tell. Like in our discussions, like as to make decisions on like a minute-to-minute basis.
Never. No. No.
Because you just can't.
Yeah, you can't. There's too much complexity. The research doesn't exist. It couldn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you do the research?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, somebody's heart stops for whatever reason.
Right.
And there's a variety of reasons. There's a variety of reasons somebody's heart can stop. Right.
So this is the point
and then so I have to make a decision like, with where like seconds matter,
Yeah.
and how do I make that, and how do I make that decision?
Right. Well, it's it's not like let's check out the latest
let's
research
do,
and
do you have a reference for that? Okay, so what is? I'd like to see an N of 10 study.
for what you're going to do.
You know what? We should enroll this patient who's having a cardiac arrest into the randomized control trial, and then we can decide.
Yeah, we'll figure out what
we
to do
we
here.
can give them an A/B test intervention, and we can figure out,
Right.
go. And then finally we'll know. We'll know what the
and
correct way to
well,
respond to that is.
Well, we could kind of do a thought experiment of that version of a physician, and we can, compare that to you. And their
Well,
parent, their patient sort of inevitably dies, and yours is okay because you use heuristics and
You use heuristics. You use heuristics. You use experience. You use a surprising amount of common sense.
yeah.
And then you make a decision. You perform an intervention.
Right, and I mean, this is something like
And
that
then,
would
and
be
then,
in
and then,
common.
and then you learn from that experience for the next time.
Well, for I would imagine to some degree for both me and you, it's like when you're dealing with living things, like I might have a retina floating in a bowl, and
but someone's going to say that's an extreme example, right? So that'll be the criticism that we would get. That
But
what we just said is an extreme example, but we use that example, as a jumping off point. If you want to do, there are reasons that you might want to do an A/B comparison, because ultimately, I think why we keep talking about that is because, why I keep talking about that is because A/B comparisons are what everybody's asking about. Oh, why do you
do this
why do you
versus
hang
that.
for 10 seconds versus 30 seconds? That's an A/B comparison, right?
Yeah, there are lots of. I mean,
and you could do ABC, whatever, but the point
right,
is
there are
that,
1,000 different variations on hang times.
Exactly.
It's literally infinite.
Yeah, out of hell, yeah. Literally, not practically, but whatever.
Right.
But the point is though, is that we do have.
And where's my evidence?
Well, and so in medicine, when you're dealing with the entire organism, and you want to do that kind of research, that's where you get into the clinical trial research.
Yeah, totally.
Right. That's when you get into randomized control trials.
Well, it's something where actually it turns out that you have to spend, like you said, in the realm of $50 million to solve a really important question, which is like when we put this very expensive, usually chemical into people, what's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, and so to answer the question of, how does this blood pressure lowering medication reduce your odds of dying in the next 5 years? Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you want to know. You don't actually want to know that it lowers blood pressure. We already know that. We know that from preclinical trials.
Yeah,
right.
We put it in a bunch of situations.
You started with the bench research to find out, okay, it has this effect
somebody
on.
Who looks
it
like
has
me.
this effect on. Somebody that looks more like Ben and said, okay, it has this effect on smooth muscle.
Yeah, and we know
it probably lowers blood pressure.
We know exactly what the chemical interacts with, and we know like variations around that chemical and what they interact. They interact with the same thing with less potency or whatever.
So millions of dollars were spent at that phase.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. To get and novel.
Easily.
Yeah. Okay, so then you get to that phase, and then you're like, okay, so now we have to test it in animals to see like what is the, because you still don't, even at that phase, you still don't actually know what the effect of the pharmaceutical agent would be.
No, you know, I guess at that point you know that
it has effects.
The molecule interacts with a protein.
Yeah. And so then you have to start figuring out what it does when you put it in.
Onto a muscle.
Yeah, onto a muscle.
That's
exactly.
Or
a tissue culture or a neuron or whatever.
Or a neuron or whatever. And then you, all the papers I read are something like we put some variation on, we put this chemical into this isolated culture of neuron, or sorry, this either some intact slice of neurons,
Yep.
or those neurons isolated in a culture dish, or those neurons in a whole animal. Right. It's just where,
Yeah, but the point is that, so it starts there. Then you put it in a whole animal. Then you kind of know what it's doing in that animal model.
Yeah. and then you still have to, even if you kind of like, wash it onto then you have to like, inject it in that animal over periods of months to make sure it doesn't all just get chewed up by your liver or whatever.
Right.
So it gets across the blood-brain barrier or whatever other situation.
So you get through all of that. You get to the point you're ready to give it to humans.
Yeah.
Right. And you want to see if it has an effect in humans.
Yeah.
So we've done all of the background work, and now we want to do a clinical trial and find out, does this have a beneficial effect?
Yeah.
In humans.
Yeah.
Okay. So you spend $50 million. You do your multi-center randomized control trial. And so, like, why though? Why is it so expensive? Well, the reason why it's so expensive is because when you're doing...
Well, there's a lot of people that...
No, because there's so much noise.
Yeah.
Why couldn't you just give it to 2 people and see if it has an effect?
Well, actually, there are drugs that you could do that. You could give it to 1 or 2 people, and the effect size is so dramatic.
Well, that's propofol.
Yeah.
You give it to one person, you're like, yep, they're asleep.
Well, the chemical, it's basically that fella whose proof boner pills was walking around in sweatpants.
Okay, but this is a tangent. So the point, So
it's a good tangent.
No, okay. So if the effect size is very large, then you don't have to have a very large sample size to see an effect.
Yeah, immediately it's working.
Right.
Right?
Right. But the problem is that the effect size for your average pharmaceutical agent is small.
Yep.
And also you want safety data.
Yep.
But for those reasons, it needs to be, and you want to know that there, and because the other thing is that there's the primary effects, but there's also all of the secondary effects and all of the side effects and so on and so forth.
Right.
And so it's very messy. And so to get an answer that is a usable answer that I could take in my day-to-day and say, yeah, I'm going to do it this way versus that way. To get that kind of an answer takes thousands of people.
Yeah.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. Both people in terms of like people who actually like they're getting the drug or not getting the drug or whatever.
That's what I mean.
And then people
enrolled in the trial.
Yeah. Then people to deal with them.
Well, there's a huge infrastructure in these studies, right?
Yeah, totally.
They're very expensive for a reason. So the average cost, might be in the tens of millions of dollars of range to do a multi-center RCT to look at, whether or not you're going to get any beneficial effect from a pharmaceutical agent. And the reason is because of all of that variation and all of that noise inside these high-level systems.
Yeah. And let's sort of remember that like before you do all of that, this is not skin suit science. People beat on this drug as hard as they could in lab. It's legitimate.
Absolutely, because as you said, by the time you're going to spend $50 million to do your multi-center RCT,
the people that
you don't want to find out 3 weeks into that, like there's or worse, 6 months into that like you got to stop it early because there's significant liver toxicity and you killed 10 people.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You don't want to be.
It's
way cheaper. It's way cheaper to like you said.
What's
to hire the grad students to beat on it in the lab in the mice and like look at it in every different cell type.
Yeah. And the guys that do that at drug companies, they do something that looks a lot like what I do, and in terms of like doing patch clamp recordings of the interactions of their lead chemicals with all sorts of different proteins that they're interested in. They really are good at what they do.
Right.
They're better than academic scientists in terms because there's a lot more money resting on.
It doesn't surprise me, right?
There's a lot more money resting on what they
funding is better.
See.
They're gonna, so they're gonna be able to recruit better. They're gonna be able to recruit good people into those positions, right?
It's.
Anyway, okay, so why are we talking about this? Why are we? So why? No,
it's,
we're getting there, dude. We're fucking there.
Yeah.
We're there.
We're slowly.
So to bring a to bring a drug to market, it cost like 20 years ago it cost $1 billion on average, and the reason it costs so much is because you got to do the bench. You got to develop the pharmaceutical agent, so you have all of the chemists doing their work.
Yeah.
Then you got to do all the sort of early screening to see does compound A167Z have any biological activity?
Right.
Who knows?
And so you're making chemicals almost at random. You're just screening them over sheets of some certain protein you're interested in.
Yep.
You know, sodium channel, potassium channel.
Anyway,
whatever.
okay. So
Sorry.
then you got phase 1, 2, and 3
Yeah.
clinical trials, and then you
Yeah.
finally get to the point. It's made it through all of that.
Yeah.
And like you said, people have tried to look for every possible problem, because if you find a problem early, then
you save literally millions of dollars.
tens of millions of dollars you'll save.
Yeah.
And so finally, it gets to the point where it's like, okay, we have a drug. We know it lowers blood pressure.
Yeah.
We
know
think-
exactly how it.
We know
will-
how it lowers,
yeah.
lowers blood pressure. We think it's safe.
Yeah.
Let's
Stick it in humans.
stick it in humans and find out.
Yeah.
And they start small at first,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They stick it in a few humans.
Yeah.
And
at very low doses. Or,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
basically, they're redoing Alexander Shulgin experiments.
And so, I don't know who that is, but so by the time, okay, and you've done all of that, and you're like, okay,
yeah.
it seems safe.
Yeah.
It seems to lower blood pressure.
Yeah.
Now we should.
Now we're ready to roll the dice on a $50 million bet.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
That this actually has a beneficial effect.
And you would know better than me. Like, how often does that come up? You won the bet.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't give you a number on that.
Yeah, but it's
but
not great.
the amount of these large, very expensive trials that are in the tens of millions of dollars, enrolling thousands of people.
With spectacular mechanistic knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, and they have a huge research infrastructure. You know, they have investigators at every site.
Yeah.
They're recruiting patients into this. They're going through the consent process. Patients are enrolled. They're doing the thing, and then at the end of the day, the paper comes out. Okay,
Yeah.
and then you look at it, and you look at the methods,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, that's retarded.
Well,
No, you're like, you know, okay. I mean, in a lot of cases, so in some cases, they find nothing.
yeah.
It was a failure. So
Yeah.
a lot of the times,
a lot of cases.
a lot of cases, they failed to find anything. No
Yeah.
beneficial effect.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they start data mining the paper. Now we're going to get into, well, did they find?
It
Let's
did
look at
kind of work in this subpopulation of people.
Exactly.
You know,
so now they start data mining. They start looking at secondary
all
endpoints.
humans were too complex. There was too much noise in the signal.
Too much noise.
But
yeah.
we're sure this fucking works.
Yes. Yeah.
So what you do is you're like, all right, well, in this little group, it kind of looks like
So you
there's
ca-
less
you
there's
call-
less
you-
less noise in a tiny little group of humans,
You call your statisticians in.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, guys,
and they beat on that data. They
we
Guantanamo Bay that
yeah,
data.
like, guys, we're $900 billion into this, making this drug.
Yeah.
We need this to be something, guys.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. We've
900 million, sorry.
Yeah.
900 billion would be.
Yeah. We've put, you know, please find something.
Please tell us
You know?
that in this one tiny circumstance.
Yeah.
The problem though is that even if they when they start doing that, we would look at that like, you know, clinicians. But by the time somebody who wants to actually use this information in a human would look at that and be like,
Well, the problem
they would look at it and be like, you got to do the study again.
Right, exactly. That's the problem. Is you find it in here, and you're like,
because it's not correct.
Exactly.
You
can't do that.
You can't do that.
Right.
You can't.
So then what you
the
have to
study
do-
was never designed to look at that secondary
Right.
endpoint.
And then what you have to do is you have to roll the dice on another 50 million.
yeah, it's like, okay,
Yeah,
we need
yeah.
another. No, so no, what you have to do is you have to go back to your investors and be like, okay, guys, we need another 50 million.
yeah.
Like, you know, because we have to do another.
Check this. You know, I got good news and bad news. The good news is it kind of worked in this group of people.
Right.
The bad news is pony up. You know,
Yeah.
we're gonna run this. We're gonna run the. And it's
Right.
like by that time, you know, and so okay. So
Well,
the point
and so that is one of the ways it goes wrong. But the other way it goes wrong is what I was saying. Is like you look at the methods and you're like, cool, guys.
no human in
But
reality
but-
is ever going to do this.
Either no human's ever going to do this, or or the way you designed the study was unrealistic, and so it's actually not informative to me because I would never use this information. I can't use this information,
Yeah.
etc. So there's a million ways this goes wrong.
Yeah, totally. Now, okay.
And
now
they used to bury
yeah.
these when they went wrong. Now they
Yeah.
actually have to register ahead of time and
yeah,
then publish
yeah.
data.
Yeah.
Because it used to be that only the positive results were ever published.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
I mean, well,
the negative stuff was just, you just lift up the pad and you fire it under there.
Well,
Oh, you found something wrong?
Yeah, and what's happening is,
Well, no. So why are we sitting here? Like, how long have we been in this? We've been talking for an hour.
Yeah.
So where are we going? Because when I see your N of 10 study
yeah,
on, like, so we have powerful pharmaceutical agents that have known biological action. We know they do things.
an army of, people have described exactly how
Yeah.
they behave.
Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent getting us to the point where we know we know they have a real effect.
Yeah,
Now we have to find out, is that real effect beneficial
yeah,
in a group of humans?
Yeah.
And the way to find that out is
by this
thousands of
method. And
this method because the noise is so extreme.
yeah, and this what would you
So-
say? This whole process is basically what biological science or
This is
health research was
this
built
this
to do.
is what it is.
was,
This is what it is.
over about 100 years, we've designed this conveyor belt to go from some glimmer of an idea.
Well,
into-
somebody no.
into-
I mean, you lick the frog in the Amazon
yeah,
rainforest.
yeah, totally.
Some weird things happen.
Well, yeah,
To go from that
yeah.
to, like, okay, we've isolated that compound.
We know exactly what that is.
Yeah, and we're gonna
like it.
yeah. And we're now gonna
We're gonna dump it in 50 million people, and we
Yeah.
hope that it's not gonna kill them.
yeah.
And not only we hope that it's not gonna kill them, it's if it kills them, they're gonna take all our good stuff.
Yeah. And
You
so
know.
okay. And so when you know how science works because you are a scientist and you do science, or you know how evidence-based evidence-based medicine is practiced,
Yeah.
right? And then you or I are shown the latest should I hang for 7 seconds or should I hang for 10 seconds
Yeah.
paper with like 10 people in it. Like,
Well, the reaction.
So that's what happens, right? So
Yeah.
it's like that's what
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
here, right?
Not only, well,
So-
nobody
so-
hands us. Let's be honest. Nobody hands us a paper like that and says, "Hey, hey guys, what do you think?" They slap that on the fucking, they present that like they're at internet trial, and
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
"This is what I got."
Yeah,
They lay
this
their
is what I
cards
got.
on the table.
I'm doing it this
Yeah, yeah.
way. I'm doing, yeah, whatever, whatever,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It doesn't even move the needle.
Well-
Like in the best case,
It's not even that it doesn't even move the needle. It's just that
it's not even science.
it's not science. It just,
The problem they want to solve can't be possibly solved by the methods that they're using.
and in some
So
cases,
it's not-
and in a lot of cases, they're using quack methods. I can look at it and be like, guys, ultrasound. I use it.
yeah.
I use it every single day.
Yeah, yeah.
The way you're using it can't answer the question you think it answers.
Yeah.
Right. For an example, and another one.
EMG is a variation on what
EMG.
Yeah.
Guys, EMG cannot be used this way.
Yeah.
Right? Let alone the fact that you can't answer the kinds of questions that you purport to be able to answer without going through the process that we just outlined.
Yeah.
Because in humans, to say, does this intervention make you a better rock climber or not? That is
Yeah.
such an insane that is such an insanely complex system with
Yeah.
so many variables that contribute.
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to be able to
Answer that
that-
massive complex question by looking at what you do over a period of 2 to 3 weeks
yeah
in
in 10
10 or 12
10 or 12 people
untrained people or whatever.
with an intervention that has honestly is going to have a treatment effect that's like vanishingly small. Like if it even
okay,
has a
so-
like let's assume it even has a plausible
given
let's assume it even has a plausible effect, okay?
Yeah.
It's not going to be like taking the boner pill.
No. I know. Well, this is where it's
You
going
see
with
where I'm
it.
going?
This is where it's
Like,
going with it.
If
Okay.
you wanted to prove that
if you had 10 people,
if you wanted to do science to prove that the boner pills work, you have to do the process we just previously outlined where it takes $1 billion.
yeah. And the starting evidence is like a dude walking around in sweatpants.
It's like
okay.
I took a pill and I got a rager.
on some
But
level,
the point is that's a very powerful intervention. That's more like
that's massive doses of tren,
yeah, exactly.
right? And then you might see something.
And
in
if
10
you're
people.
if you're asking like should I hang for 7 seconds or should I hang for 30 seconds or whatever,
and your evidence is 10 people. It's like, well, that amount of evidence answers a question that is in people who don't train at all, or people who are force
It just doesn't answer the question.
Industrial quantities of steroids. There's a difference. That's the type of.
It just can't, but it won't even answer that. Not properly, right?
I mean, with 10 people, you could say like, massive amounts of trend.
No. I know. But look, we got to back it up. We're losing track. That's not the point. The point is that if you have something where the effect size is very small, not very powerful, and you want to know if it's going to have an effect in something complex like climbing, like if you have, where
the readout
in aggregate
is enormously complex.
Exactly, and so you want to know, does this teeny weeny tiny intervention have a positive effect?
Yeah.
A positive actual outcome effect on the rock, like the grades are going to go up if you do it.
Yeah.
That's the question you ultimately want to answer.
Yeah, totally. That's a good question to ask.
Well, it's a good question to ask, but it's going to cost you $50 million to answer
find
it.
out.
Like, to scientifically find out.
Yeah.
It's going to cost millions of dollars to answer that question.
Totally. Now, alternatively,
because there's so much noise, and that's the reason why drug companies have to spend that kind of money, because there's so much noise in the system.
But the answer they get is a pretty good fucking answer. You can put, they bet $50 million to find it out.
Well, no, but we said that in a lot of cases it's negative. They got to go to secondary outcomes.
Let's say, okay, they bet $50 million to find it out, and if the answer looks good, that's a tiny amount. Now we're building a fucking factory to build this.
Of course.
To deliver this stuff in industrial level quantities. Like, it's.
Well, that's the rationale for why they spend why the capital investment makes sense.
Right. If you want to answer the question that everyone in your comments is asking, on some level.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, to find out the answer using science, legit
science,
the investment is. You're going to have to pony up a couple mil.
Exactly.
Straight up.
Exactly.
You're going to have to pony up a couple mil, and then you'll get a scientific answer.
I'm telling you, a real scientific answer.
It'll be legit.
Right. Exactly.
Now, alternatively,
there
is another alternative here.
Yeah.
Right. You could run an experiment, N of 1, on yourself, for a couple months, right?
Yeah.
Pretty low investment.
Yeah.
Run it for a couple months. Track whatever variables you want to track, and see what happens. It doesn't cost you any. It definitely doesn't cost you 50 mil.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you like where it's going, keep doing it.
Yeah.
In terms of everything we're presenting here, that's the dichotomy. It's not the dichotomy is not.
Yeah.
I studied this in 10 people. I published a paper in Journal of Physiology or Journal of Neurophysiology.
Because neither of us respect that.
Right, and it said this. It's P of 0.04. You should do it. Well,
I would rather actually just get somebody with a lot of I would rather get somebody with a lot of climbing experience and be like, what have you done that works?
Totally.
I respect that more.
Unfortunately,
anybody who gets in front of a camera and tells you I'm a science-based lifter, and presents the kind of evidence that they present.
Yeah.
Are they science-based? Is that science?
No. the straight answer is no. It's a goblin wearing a version of it's wearing real science as a skin suit.
Exactly.
And this is the hard part about saying that is. I respect. Look. I love projects.
Well,
I love projects more than anything.
I do. I have my own, rigorous data collection and self-experimentation.
Totally. Unfortunately, okay. I love projects. Is there a way to get better at climbing? Is a great project to have.
Yeah.
It's the best. I certainly enjoyed lots of years of doing it. You're enjoying it.
Yeah.
It's an excellent project to have. If I could credibly study that project in a laboratory, I would do it.
Yep.
But I didn't figure out any way to get the price down.
Exactly. Yeah.
To do it.
Because because you're trying to study outcome data.
Right.
The reason is because doing that you're getting into the realm, literally it is legitimately the realm of clinical medicine. where you're
Yeah.
looking at
it's worse in clinical medicine. I would say.
Yeah, it's worse. It's more complicated.
You know,
it is.
in clinical medicine, you're measuring metrics like, let's say, how much.
Yep.
You know, and this is how much,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's more. There's
Here's
more.
our-
There's more.
Here's our panel of metrics.
It's an even noisy. So because the reason why it's so expensive to do studies in clinical medicine versus laboratory studies is because every time you move up, every time you move up,
A complexity level,
right? It gets noisier.
You
right?
get further and further away from the primary data.
You get more and more. Well, your model is more and more simplistic.
Yeah.
And every time you have a simplistic model, you are taking all the variation and squashing it down, which is introducing noise.
Right. As much as I might, want to, I can't actually poke electrodes around inside human eyes. So if I want to study how human vision works, I have to use a kind of a crummy proxy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're still talking about answering a low-level question, though.
Right.
You went away from the point there because you're talking about answering a question about voltage activity inside of an eyeball.
Yeah.
But my point is that every time you move up the complexity chain, there's more and more compression because your model is taking all of that underlying reality and simplifying it down.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And so the higher you go up, then the more expensive it gets to do research because you have to account you have to account for all of that variation, all of that underlying variation.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Well, so
that's why you need that's why you need these randomized control trials with such a large number of people in them.
Right.
And
because
then,
you need enough information coming in one end of the pipeline.
Exactly.
When you filter it when you discard, there's still enough there.
You're asking such a high level question,
Yeah, totally.
And then when it comes to climbing performance, it's even a step above that because
climbing's complex.
Because climbing itself is you got humans.
It's not blood cholesterol level.
Exactly.
It's super complex.
It's super complex.
So it's like, well, if you thought, if you had to bet, if you had to bet $50 million to answer like something like, here's the directional movement of this panel of like metrics in terms of like blood biomarkers. Well, like I don't even know how that. We understand that so much better than we understand how do you even quantify the difficulty of a line, like a climbing line?
Exactly. And so
it's quantified in such a hand-wavy way.
And so, so the idea that, you're going to be able to say whether or not doing bicep curls makes you a better climber, scientifically.
Scientifically, I'm telling you, you can't. I mean, you can.
You can. Well, you
actually,
can.
right? And we could put a
we
could put a price tag on it.
We could put a price tag on it. It's going to be in the tens of millions of dollars to answer that question.
We know it's north of it's on the high end of tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right.
Easily.
Minimum.
You don't have to do the development costs, right? So a lot of that is gone. So
that's a fraction of a fraction.
It's a fraction of the cost because a lot of the costs are at the end stage. So what you're just jumping to the very end stage. But the thing is,
it's like, well, do you want to make that bet?
But see, because you have to, because in order to control for all the underlying variables that you have there, you're just going to need you're going to need a massive. You're going to need.
Yeah, there's so much confounding.
There's so much confounding. Like,
so what you need is actually you need an order of magnitude more people. So
exactly.
When you look at this type of study of humans, you're literally
because like I said, we're moving up the complexity.
You're talking hundreds of millions of humans.
Well, you wouldn't need that many to answer the question.
What do you? Okay, so let's say it's in the range.
You could answer the question. You could realistically answer the question in the tens of thousands. Yeah.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, you can do it in the tens of thousands. Maybe.
Actually, this is the problem.
It's really difficult.
I shouldn't even speculate.
Yeah, I can't even speculate because the effect size is tiny.
Well, it's noisiness and confounding variables. Like you actually need an army of.
Well, no, I mean, but you can do it. You can do like a back of napkin effect size calculation for how many subjects you'd need to recruit into a study like this, right?
To see an effect of a certain size.
Yeah, exactly. And so you exactly. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, I mean, you're looking at something with a very tiny effect size in a very noisy data set. So
you need a lot. You need a lot of people.
A lot of people.
It's going to be a lot worse than measuring like blood pressure medication or.
And those studies frequently come back, we didn't have enough people, or
Yeah.
we didn't have enough people to convincingly answer the primary outcome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Is the answer true, but we don't know it's true because they just didn't study enough people, but they hit the truth by luck, right?
Well, what in science, in medical science, certainly what we use those small scale studies for is just hypothesis generation.
Yeah, totally.
You're like,
it's like, that looks good.
You're like, okay,
Well,
you know,
all of my work is basically, in terms of like medical science, is like hypothesis generation.
yeah, because dudes already know how to get huge. First of all,
Yeah, it's
like
you know, yeah. The answer is the first answer is steroids, and the second answer is, you know, there's 1,000 ways to get bigger.
There's
a thousand ways to get bigger, and
Right.
like, you're a unique human.
And
The way that
that's
works,
ultimately the problem, right?
the way that works
and
for
that's
you
what,
that you like,
and-
is different from the next guy.
And that's why these N of 20 studies aren't informative. They can't, because they can't.
They're
answer-
less
they
than not
can't-
informative.
yeah.
They're negative information in a lot of cases.
That's right, because they cannot they cannot answer the questions, and you'd say, well, but like they're literally,
But they're not incrementing towards something.
well, they're not. What they're not incrementing towards is telling you if you're going to be a better climber or not. See, that's ultimately the problem.
I mean, that's one problem of a lot of problems, because it's like.
But that's what everybody wants, right? The problem is that they're doing like low level. They're doing
no,
low,
stop for
like
1 second.
even if you're being generous, even if you're being generous and you're not looking at their stupid EMG studies or their misapplication of ultrasound or any number of methodological problems, right? When
Yeah.
you look, when you or I would look at it and you'd be like, guys, no.
Okay, so this is the problem. Well, okay. Here,
like-
would you say that 10 N of 10 studies equaled a N of 100 study?
No, it doesn't work that way.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's they're not increments.
And you can't add them together either, as is often
don't
done.
sum.
And they do it, and they do it. They're
They do
stupid
it,
meta
yeah.
studies, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
but it's-
guys, you can't do that.
Uh,
The way meta studies
I-
are conducted is so problematic.
An accumulation of crap is not gold at some point.
Exactly.
It's an accumulation of crap.
And that is why the large multi-center
You know,
RCT is
like-
is the $50 million gold standard,
right.
right? Because that is how you would do it if you wanted to do it,
Yeah, but it's
to answer the question, right?
yeah, but you can't. It's not like if
You can't get there. Okay?
You can't run $50
You
million
actually-
studies and
You
get
can't.
there.
You can't do the N of 10 studies
Yeah.
and get to the gold standard.
Right, they're not.
And then you just can't add 10 of those together and be like, okay, well, we have an idea though.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It's okay. And here's another minor problem. Okay. So every paper you would see that would show up, it would float around, you know, bubble up out of the cauldron. It's not a signal because there's a mirror image of that paper that no one ever sees because it doesn't tell you anything, right?
Well, those are the ones that get swept under the rug.
Right, exactly.
Right? And the difference is these you're not allowed to sweep them under the rug when you're doing the large
Right.
scale reputable, because in order to be published, you have to register,
Right.
right? In in a clinical trials registry.
Right. But you don't have to do that for, you know, you can check.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. So what's happened generally is once you get away from mechanistic science, where there's a pretty close relationship between like what you're studying, like what's the truth, like stats matter, but they don't matter as severely. Every field, so psychology got bit recently,
Yeah.
and now they have to
yeah.
pre-register everything
Yeah.
because they were naughty as a group of people. they were bad scientists. They were bad scientists for 30 years. Since you know.
They have replication. It's called the replication
Yeah,
crisis.
you can look up the replication. They were naughty.
Look up the replication crisis.
They were naughty and they got spanked, and now they have to pre-register everything. You know, they got grounded. And economics, you know, variations on economics got grounded. Behavioral economics.
I mean, we're not even,
right?
and we're not even getting into
No, but what
we're not
happens
even
is-
getting into the problems with the peer review process
Right,
or the
right.
huge amounts of academic
But
fraud.
all I'm saying is,
You're
when
saying
you-
the
when
farther
you-
you
wh-
get from these mechanistic studies.
right, you start getting closer and closer to some variation on like skin suit science.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, that's what's happening.
It's a ticking clock
Right.
until they have to pre-register their studies because they've been naughty. And exercise science looks like to me. I'm not. I don't want to be. To me, it looks like exercise science.
Well, not. Yeah. I know.
It looks like every other replication crisis science, and they just where eventually they have to pre-register their studies, and they have to be a little bit more rigorous with the statistics. And I think they just haven't got caught yet.
It's never going to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's never going to happen because realistically, like why do these other areas, why does it become, because there's something on the line, right?
Or the separation between the money that the Knies department gets and the money to answer the questions they want to answer is like,
But like what I'm saying is, where's the drive for academic standards ever going to come from?
Yeah. So actually, who knows? They could putt along in perpetuity,
Right.
with this type of work, and there might never be a reckoning.
There won't be. So I guess the issue, the funny part is that what's going on is that small scale studies that should be in the realm of like your kind of science, like more mechanistic,
Right.
are being presented in the
Right,
realm of
yes.
my
that's
field.
What distilled down when I see this is the problem.
And then you look at it and you're like, well, that's not how you do mechanistic science.
Well, right. Okay, so distilled
And then
down.
I look at it and I say, well, that's not how you answer questions in complex biological systems.
Right. Distilled down in my realm, N of 10 is like great.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're doing like the experiments are pretty well controlled. So if I say I looked at 10 neurons and we measured the conductance through a channel, and the level of noise is relatively small. Our measurement device is relatively precise.
Right, because you're using, because you're working at a.
We're looking right at it.
You're working at a scale where your model of reality is closer.
Yeah.
Closer. Or,
yeah. I'm touching reality much closer.
You're much closer to the underlying system.
Yeah.
With your model.
And I'm doing a ton of work to control it.
Exactly.
Right. A ton of work. I guess basically the number of increments like of units that you study has to be related to how well you control the system.
Right.
And it just isn't in the types of evidence people are presenting to you as, here's what I do. It's backed by science.
Right.
I'm a science-based guy.
Because what I'm interested in is getting better at getting up this rock climb.
Right. And here's another
and that is just so far up the complexity chain of science.
Right. And your options are not those kind of crummy N of 10 studies versus nothing, right? Because that's the false dichotomy that's presented.
Exactly.
It's like, you can do what literally every gym dummy does down, and it's like, I tried it for 3 months. I tried it for 6 months.
Yep.
I got bigger. I'm doing it until it stops working.
Yeah.
It's insane. And then you have some fucking Reddit nerd that's like, well, in the laboratory, that doesn't seem to work. It's like, dude, my biceps are bigger than yours. Why would I listen to you? Fuck this paper. Like, I'm not trying to like.
Well, it's not even that, right? It's,
Dude, I got the evidence.
I hear you, but it's not even that. It's that.
No.
It can't be,
And it's not even that you won't find zero answer. You'll find an answer. Someone will be happy. They'll delight in telling you an answer backed by science. And it's like, it's not even that it will be right or wrong. It won't even.
It's just noise.
It's just nothing.
It's nothing.
Like, in order to be right or wrong.
And even if I did what they said and I get up the rock climb, or I don't, it's also meaningless.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't prove or disprove anything. Because at that level, in order to actually do the science to prove or disprove.
Again, this is sort of I think this is where people misunderstand what science is for, right?
Yeah.
Science is for answering a question answering like generally like a pretty small, tiny question in a way that like that question is done with like forever,
Yeah.
more or less.
And
You know
that,
what I mean?
and that's why you drill down into ion channels in
Yeah,
like in
'cause
rat,
that's the-
in mouse eyeballs, right?
That's the level of question
That's the level
I feel comfortable answering.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. And when you go up and you move up the complexity, you try to answer the big questions. The big questions like, how do I get better at getting up this rock climb?
Yeah, it's insane.
It's
like
just
the problem is like it would be like asking me how to become better at chess because chess uses your neurons
yeah.
and I study neurons.
Exactly.
And it's like, dude, I don't fucking like. Do you know how many levels of complexity and abstraction there are between me and that?
Yeah.
It's like infinite.
And that's the problem. So I guess, to be charitable, it's not all that the mechanism studies are bad, although many of them are bad.
Yeah.
Like, many of it, like in the exercise realm, like the stuff that's being, like the cadaver stuff, like it's just,
I mean, the cadaver stuff is. I'll be charitable and just.
there's basically a whole business now, or there's a market for people monetizing reading abstracts, presenting it as a system of knowing or science.
Yeah, we monetized misunderstanding reality.
Yeah.
Boy, is it lucrative, but it always has been. There's always been
Yep.
somebody who's happy to present a skewed version of reality.
But in this case, it happens to fall into your professional domain, and into mine,
Yeah.
and we look at it.
Well, we both looked at it and we decided not to measurably change our behavior based on the quality of that evidence.
Right. And so the problem is we've just spent, 2 hours
Yeah.
trying to articulate that understanding.
Without entering just terminal nerd spaz mode.
Right.
You can do a lot of experiments yourself, and you can do your own science
Yep.
on your body,
Yep.
and you're gonna have, if you track things well, you can actually find out cool shit.
Yep.
Like for real, you can
Yeah.
find out cool shit, and
Yeah,
you can
I agree with that.
you can
Yeah.
understand whether the thing you're doing is working. Like you could do it on yourself. How you structure your training, it's like it's a little bit like when
Well,
you
because
trust.
so the question then
like,
would be, okay,
okay.
you found something, you
Here's the
experimented on yourself, you found an interesting outcome.
Yeah,
Well, why couldn't I do an N of 10 study?
you could.
Yeah. But then why is that not an interesting result to you?
Because it doesn't answer any question in any way better than the N of 1 study did. It actually, it's worse. It's worse.
Well, I think I can answer the question for you, but that is an interesting thought experiment, right? It's because you didn't actually prove what you did worked when you do your. All you did is like, well, I've made, you haven't actually proved anything in your N of 1,
Well,
and your N of 10 doesn't prove anything either.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, not in the realm of
Not in the realm of. It's not in the realm of science.
Exactly.
But it is sort of in the realm of stuff you can answer without needing science.
Yeah.
Right. There's
Right.
There's
And-
a lot
exactly.
of. There's a lot of stuff you can answer that science is bad.
Like-
a bad way to study it.
Like 90% of my job,
yeah.
right? And frankly, a large amount of rock climbing,
Yeah.
because you can't do the science as for all the
Science is the wrong
it's not
tool
it's not the right tool
Uh,
for all the reasons we've articulated.
until you get in the range of like dumping millions and millions
Exactly.
of dollars into it,
Exactly.
right?
Okay, so you're doing something that the science is not the right tool to answer. For example, like what do you do in the middle of a cardiac arrest event, right?
Yeah.
Science is not the right tool, and you're like, well, I'm going to do what works for me because I've seen this before and I have a lot of experience, and this is how.
This is how it works.
Yeah,
Like
and this is how my mentor told me how to do it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's worked, and we've been okay, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody comes along and is like, "Well, fellas, I've got the scientific answer."
Now here's a great
it's just not knowable. It
case
wasn't the right
study. If somebody gives you some kind of like N of 10-ish study,
because that's what they'd be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
But imagine somebody did the same thing, but they gave you like, yeah, we studied this in 12,000 people, And it turns out that if you change what you're doing in this slight way, you actually end up with like a measurable improvement. You're like, whoa, okay.
I can't.
That's pretty good evidence.
I know what you're saying. It would be very good evidence. The problem, I can't even imagine
that would happen.
that could even be done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the And so the N of 10 isn't any more convincing than an anecdote to me, basically. I mean, so there's value. So, and I think that's where we're ending up, right? There could be value there, but it's essentially anecdotal.
It's like even if it was true, it was true by accident, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
And
because that's right. Yeah.
And so it's like,
well, a lot of our anecdotes are true. I mean, I have a system I think that leads to success.
Yeah.
And
right, and it's like.
But I cannot scientifically prove it.
Yeah, and look,
I can't because I know to actually prove that. I know what that means. I think that's the problem. Right. I know what it actually means to prove it.
Right, and you've
I can't
again
prove it.
You've tracked.
Yes.
You've tracked like every calorie for the last 15 years.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And I know
every calorie.
And there are things that I know work, and there are things that I'm not sure of. Right. There are many things where it's like I'm not sure whether A or B is the best approach here.
Right.
Many such areas.
Yeah.
And then there are areas where I'm like, yeah, this works for sure. This is the way I'm doing it. It definitely works.
Well, okay. So let's take the rehab protocol, which is like. Probably has the
well, I know that. Yeah, effect size. Yeah,
effect size.
Yeah, I know.
Like that's the biggest effect size of the stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I know. Right? Yeah, I know that works.
You know,
but I wouldn't.
But it's not science.
It's not science.
You know.
And to do science on it is
again, it's even with that huge effect size. Like,
well, I need millions of dollars.
It's
tens of millions. I need tens of millions of dollars to prove that works scientifically.
But you can run the experiment. On yourself,
and the effect size is huge, and so you're like, yes, it works.
It's so big,
it works.
It won't take you 3 weeks.
You're like,
it's not like building a bigger bicep where you got to wait 3 months to figure out if it happened or not.
Yeah,
you will find out.
You'll be
very
like, yeah,
quickly.
It works because the effect size here is huge.
Yeah, totally.
But the N of 1 is not,
and it's not science.
The N of 1 is not
science.
So
this is, I'm telling you,
and the N of 10 is not science either, and that's the problem.
I'm telling you,
and so
my friend is doing a protocol with a huge effect size. Like, this is the best thing you could have if you wanted to be like, I got science.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's not science.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, and your evidence.
But then you do it.
But then you do it.
But you're so convinced by you do it.
But this is the crazy thing is like.
And then you do it. And you're like, yeah, it does work.
Yeah, and that is kind of.
And we both know it's not science.
That's not science, but it is a way to know something.
It is a way to know something.
So this is the problem. This is the fundamental problem is you don't have to abdicate all the ways you know shit. Don't have to be abdicated to science.
And when
I'm a scientist. I love science. I love it so much. I've given up basically every other thing that humans value. You know what I mean? Like, I sleep in my truck regularly to do more science.
You live in a vehicle.
You know, not to climb, which is kind of cool. To do more science, which is not that cool.
Yeah.
Right? I love science more than anything, and and what I'm saying is like, all of the things you decide don't have to be governed by. You don't need scientific evidence for almost anything you do.
And we recognize the limits and what it would take to sort of answer the kinds of questions that are being
with science.
And it's just, guys.
But you can get pretty good answers with no science.
Yeah.
And very good answers.
Well, the thing is that this self-experimentation, right? People call that science too, but it's not.
It's not science.
It's not science.
But it doesn't have to be science.
Yeah.
Like, to be kind of a good way to know something.
I know.
Right?
Yeah. But then there's the charlatans in the middle. But then there's the charlatans in the middle.
Right.
Who are selling it to you like it is science, calling it science.
Yeah.
And it's just somebody else's anecdote. Like those small scale studies. Those small scale studies are just somebody else's anecdote.
Yeah, and it's just a bigger accumulation of anecdotes. Like if you do your own oil changes, you know it's done right. You know what I mean? You know everything got done.
Yeah.
It's like there's some.
Well, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, that is a recipe for you to carry on in the scientific inquiry process, not to actually be like, yep, settled. I know. Yeah. I've read this paper. I now know something.
Right. It's like reading the peer-reviewed paper, which like a lot of the science-based lifters that represents like a unit of evidence. That's the starting point, right?
Yeah.
Like for a working scientist,
yeah.
when you read a paper, it's a starting point, right? You're like, oh my God, this is, it's
yeah, it's not a path to knowing. It's a path to.
It's not a piece of evidence presented to a judge. It's a recipe presented to a chef.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
It's the starting point, and I think in a lot of these cases, it's people present it as a finishing point, and it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Yep.
We're not even using the same.
And exactly, and then so there's no shared understanding there, right?
Yeah.
And so then
the crazy thing is.
So then you get into an argument about the content or about the particulars, right?
Yeah.
But where we're coming from when we look at it is like this is just not they're not working from a framework that we
would recognize as
a way to actually
an increment of evidence.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything. You're just evaluating increments of evidence, and that's not an increment of evidence.
Yeah.
It doesn't add anything.
Well, it is a recipe for a chef. I mean, so what should actually happen there is that
right. Yeah. Exactly. It's a recipe for a chef. So somebody should look at every single one of those N-of-10 trials and say like, wow, that's pretty cool. Let's try to do it in like 1,000 people.
Right.
Right.
Let's make this more robust. Let's account for more noise.
This is so cool. We're gonna do it in a lot of people.
Right, and then that's when it gets super expensive.
Right.
That's when it gets into the realm of that's when it starts getting into the realm of actually sort of answering a question. And I talked about this before too, because experimental evidence doesn't even answer the causation question. Like that's the other thing.
Right, because
even if you have the $50 million RCT, okay?
Yeah.
You have a positive result. You have the $50 million RCT. Okay, you have experimental evidence.
Yeah.
And now you have 12 other criteria to say whether that's actually causative or not.
Right. Totally.
And there's been cases where we've had the experimental evidence, but it failed all the other causality criteria. And well, it's not.
It didn't cause. We don't know. We can't definitively prove that it caused that.
It's not causal.
Yeah, totally.
Something else is going on here. It's probably not causal.
And there's like versions of martial arts where dudes are like, I'm martial, like they do like the Mortal Kombat, like
the fake martial artists, yeah.
And then MMA dudes come in and fucking murder them.
Yeah.
Just beat the brakes off them.
Well,
and that's somebody.
Well, what's happening there?
That's somebody who's read a lot of N-of-10 studies.
No, what's happening? What's happening there is reality is intruding. Reality is intruding on a false structure,
a false model of reality.
Right. So you have a fake model of reality, and then actual reality comes in and kicks the living shit out of them.
Those dudes, those guys often have their group of students, and they do the power up, and the students are the students are so operating within like the
spell. It's
the
like
distortion field of like this guy that they're like, oh, I've been hit by the color, you know what I mean? Like they fully like, oh no, right? They do the same thing you see when the like the snake handler, and then like so they've constructed this crazy model of reality.
I mean, we should have brought a tent.
Yeah, this is like as good as it gets. They've constructed this crazy model of reality, and then not even a good MMA dude, some duster comes in, fucking belts this dude in the face, and it's like, poof! You just see a bad model of the world evaporate in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
And it's like when I see people ask you for, oh, what about this study? All I see is those Mortal Kombat dojo guys, like presenting their style of combat. It's like evaluate the the 5 figures of shuriken death, and you're like, dude, like, wham, like, bam, motherfucker. Like it's it's not even the MMA guy doesn't sit there and be like, well, let me try to like enter their version of reality.
Yeah.
It's like, no, this is obviously.
And I usually respond.
Nuts.
I usually respond with something polite, like.
Yeah. But the MMA guys never like oh, if I get too close, he's gonna icicle death finger me. It's like, no, dude, I'm not worried.
He's like,
I'm not worried about this goofy bitch and his
like,
icicle fingers.
He's like, I don't want to mess with these freaks.
Yeah.
He's like, ew.
Yeah. It's like, it's like, you know, let's be polite. Like, this is,
Yeah.
this
is good. This is
you know,
this is on the spectrum of polite.
um,
Well, and you know, on the point of there's ways of knowing things outside of science, right?
yeah,
Like, we don't know how the drugs that I use every single day
work on a fundamental level.
It's not known.
Like, look it up.
He didn't believe me when I first.
No, I did, because I had looked it up
Yeah,
on
yeah,
myself,
okay.
on my own. Well, we had a little bit of.
Well, and
back and forth, but, like,
ultimately, why it's not known is because we don't understand the nature of consciousness, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, because the problem is.
So it turns out, like,
Yeah,
knowing how you turn the lights out on consciousness is a big part of understanding consciousness.
Exactly.
And that's about as big a problem as you can, you
Right.
know. You thought getting up rocks was a big fucking problem?
Well, that's exactly.
Consciousness is a big fucking
Well,
problem.
consciousness is the biggest
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
right? It is the
You know,
biggest.
the human
It is-
mind is the,
Well, I mean,
the
it is-
most
it is-
complex artifact that we've discovered,
Yeah.
straight up.
Well, anyway, the point is that we don't know how the mind works.
Yeah.
I don't know how the drugs work. I do my job every single day just fine.
Yeah, totally. And yeah. And it's like, you know.
I know how to use them, and there's no science around that either. Not really. Not.
Yeah, right. There's
Well, it's just not known. It's not known how
yeah.
they work.
So it's, you know.
We know some. You know, we know some pharmacokinetic parameters and stuff like that. But,
Right. But
And those characteristics do inform how I use them.
totally. And you would have, like, pretty good sort of, you know, this person fits in this box and we can.
Yeah, but that's all
approximately-
through experience.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but that's all through experience, right? Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
individualizing it, so I can know things about the general pharmacokinetic parameters.
Yeah.
But like individualizing it to an individual person, it's all experience.
Yeah. It's,
And that's the thing, right? And so I come at, you know, and so I'm well acquainted with the fact that, you know,
humans are enormously different.
enormously different, enormously complex.
Yeah.
You know,
Dealing with drugs that have the biggest effect size that you could imagine.
And then-
AKA you're awake and you're a normal human, or you're
well,
asleep.
and they're all like, and there's other ones too, right?
Yeah.
You know, potent vasodilators
Yeah,
and
yeah.
opioids, so
Yeah.
like potent opioids.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's well familiar nowadays
Yeah.
with the synthetic opioids.
Yeah.
And you know, and the ones that are popular aren't even the most potent, because the most potent synthetic opioids are too dangerous.
Yeah, I
Even-
was
they're too
gonna-
dangerous for recreational
I was
use.
going to say,
So-
that I would imagine that you would have the same problem as the
Well, there's just no-
isolation of
yeah.
tetrodotoxin.
Yeah,
where
they're just no.
everyone
yeah,
touching
they're
it.
just no fun. Everybody's
Yeah,
overdosing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, so you know, and so you can use all of these tools, and you can achieve powerful biological activity and effects.
Yeah.
You know, and you can manipulate them in a myriad of complicated ways.
Yeah.
But it's not science though. You know what I mean?
Without
Like,
even entering the realm of like real science.
yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like yeah, it's garage tinkering
Yeah, totally.
for
But there are
at a professional
you know,
scale.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then eventually there's a problem that's big enough and has enough money behind it. We bring over the big guns, the science guns, and we fucking answer it.
And that exactly, and that's actually, and we only apply the big guns when the question is of like enough importance or
Yeah,
has enough
totally.
financial value, or there's some kind of an
Yeah, yeah,
external incentive, like
Yeah.
you've developed this molecule and like maybe we want to switch to this one.
Yeah, totally.
You want to convince people to switch to it, but it's
Totally.
more expensive.
Yeah.
Whatever. You know, and that's when the science guns are, or you know, sometimes there are like, you know, this versus that style of anesthesia, like which one
Yeah,
is
totally.
safer. It took the profession 20 straight. Oh yeah, it took the profession 20 straight years to answer that question. Millions and millions, of cases, and studies that were in the hundreds of thousands of patients.
Yeah.
And you know what the answer was?
Doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter. No difference.
They all go sleepy.
Well, no, it was actually a sleep versus a nerve block technique.
Okay.
But anyway, the specifics don't matter. But the point is like 20 years of scientific inquiry. We wanted to know because it's a particular case with a high degree of morbidity and a
Yeah.
high social cost to
Yeah.
the system.
Yeah.
And so it costs a lot of money to the government.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars are spent on this problem, okay?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to know the answer to it. And so it did matter, like a small difference, if there was one, would make a big difference.
So
when you're talking about
each increment, the difference is
Exactly.
like literally you're talking like
and so there's enough
hundreds of thousands of dollars per increment.
Exactly. And so there's enough incentive there to be like, okay,
yeah, we got to bring the big fucking guns.
bring the big guns.
Yeah,
exactly. Let's answer the question.
I think that's a problem. I think that's a misunderstanding.
And it was 20 years, hundreds of thousands of cases, databases that included millions and millions of patients.
Yeah.
Outcome databases, large data sets.
Yeah.
And the answer was nothing.
Yeah. And
No
that's
difference.
actually science working,
Right.
which is crazy.
Well, that's the kind of question that you'd bring science to bear on. And that is actually the same scale of question of.
In terms of like you're saying in terms of rock climbing.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a question that is very analogous to the kinds of questions people want to know in rock climbing.
Yeah, and it's like, look, I want to know too.
Yeah, me too.
But I don't want to know with science with a price tag on it.
It's not
measured in.
Well, I guess that's what we're getting to, right? I understand
manpower years.
I understand that the kinds of questions that I want the answer to in rock climbing will never
be scientifically
will never be scientifically
they just
answered.
Won't be.
They will never be scientifically answered. They cannot be scientifically answered.
Yeah.
Well, they can be, but with the kind of
with the kind
of resources and investment that I just described.
Yeah. So we're
and so so that's why I'm content.
Feel like this when we enter some of the higher Kardashev scale.
Yeah, exactly.
When we harness
when we are a Kardashev 2.
Yeah, when we harness all of the power of the sun.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have a population we'll have a population in the trillions.
Yeah.
And we'll have so many resources and so many scientists just looking for a tiny question to answer.
Yeah. That we can answer some of these questions.
Well, the population's in the trillions, so recruiting a couple 100,000 people to answer some
trivial.
It's going to be trivial. So when we are a Kardashev 2 civilization, like climbing YouTube, science-based climbing YouTube, it's going to be lit.
Yeah, it's going to be excellent.
Science-based lifting, it's going to be legit.
Yeah, right.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. At Kardashev 2.
Yeah,
I'm here for it.
Totally. Actually, a lot of problems get solved at Kardashev 2.
Yeah.
In a way, you know what I mean? Like, if you really want scientific answers to your questions about rock climbing, devote all of your effort to pushing humanity up the Kardashev scale.
No. I mean, if you really want those scientific answers, you probably want to flash freeze your head right now.
Yeah.
So that you can be revived 1,000 years in the future.
Essentially, you want to relive plot of Futurama in order to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a Kardashev step from an answer, essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah. Two.
Yeah, two.
Because I don't think, because a Kardashev 1 is just all of the solar radiation.
Yeah, right.
You're talking all of the stars radiation. That's Kardashev 2.
Right. So
that is a full Dyson swarm.
Yeah, we're two Kardashev steps from. The evidence we're getting is two Kardashev steps from the evidence we would like to see, where we'd be like, we've science has solved this answer.
That's right.
Finally.
Because even at Kardashev 1, there's just no way that humanity will devote the kind of resources to answering these trivial.
Yeah.
It's just such a.
We won't have enough spare people floating.
We don't
around.
have enough spare people.
Yeah.
We don't. Yeah. Well, and just it's expensive. And
Yeah.
Well,
but that's the more people you get.
Yeah. Well, you're funding
the value.
Yeah. Exactly. Because you have that's why it's expensive, because you have to literally fund those people to live.
Yeah. Exactly.
to do your science.
Yeah. Well, think about exactly.
Right.
How much?
That's where the cost comes from.
Yeah. How much would it cost for someone to buy you for a year?
Yeah.
To do a certain type of
exactly
training.
Yeah. Well,
And now imagine.
Even that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean that's a good point too, because the kinds of studies that we see are they're just not adequately controlled for.
Yeah, and it's
You'd really want to recruit because if you have a free living population the way that they do in medical science, and you're doing it for sport. Yeah, that's just.
You need enormous amounts.
Oh,
no,
you need an order of magnitude.
The way to do it, I think, would be.
You're looking at a $50 million. You're looking at a $500 million study.
Right. That's what we're saying. Yeah. I mean, because
it's one order
for $50 million, you're getting answers to way simpler questions.
So
it's like, well, all right, how many?
Yeah.
So we're talking
because you just can't trust.
I want to buy 1,000 people for a year.
Yeah.
And control all of their behavior.
Yeah.
you know, and then I think I can get an outcome
Yeah.
that I believe.
Yeah, or at
With
least,
science.
or at least I want to buy. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because we're not even dealing. The answer we
Well,
want.
or just
the
the
thing
fu-
we want to answer is climbing.
Yeah. Well,
Climbing is enormously messy. The
Yeah.
grading system is
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
It's a bad ruler.
yeah, it's a
and
bad.
we-
Yeah.
And we're using
you don't
this
even-
bad
yeah,
ruler.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
you don't even know if you're getting better.
yeah. It's
Everybody
you know,
who's been plateaued has tricked themselves for the first solid year,
Yeah.
maybe more of that plateau,
Right.
thinking they're getting better.
Yeah, I'm still
Well,
getting good.
Well, I did this other V9
Yeah,
in just
yeah.
3 sessions,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, yeah, but that one's
Every
soft
V-
and it suited
yeah,
you,
every
and the temps were
V9,
good, and
yeah,
you know
it's
what I
like-
mean? Like,
It's like it's enormous complexity. It's climbing. When you want climbing performance as your primary outcome, that's harder than weightlifting.
yep.
But because the weightlifting
Right.
weightlifting ruler is
Well, they're
way better.
Well, they're just going by hypertrophy, and those studies are so severely flawed. But
Yeah,
whatever.
The pre-registration is coming. For,
Yeah, pre-registration's coming for you.
there's some. Well, it actually here's what's funny. It's worse if it never comes because it means your science is so irrelevant.
Yes.
No one
yeah.
even bothered to
It's
disprove it.
and it's never going to come. I think
Yeah,
I'm in the camp
right.
that it's never going to come.
Well, I mean,
for this
I'm
exercise science,
I'm
it's
sort of
never
the
gonna come.
eternal optimist, and I think it will come.
Yeah, well,
And I could easily be proven wrong. It's more depressing if that type of if the Grim Reaper of pre-registration never
yeah,
happens.
yeah, that's a good point.
You know, I'm gonna sully this right to the fucking end, and then we got to get out of here. It's
we gotta go. I hope the boat's still there.
that's not science, and but that doesn't make it worse,
Yep.
right? Not everything has to be science.
Yeah, I know what you're
Like
saying.
that's
yeah.
the
yeah.
end of the story is
That
you
was
know
an interesting
I-
collection. It's an interesting
it's
collection.
an interesting thing.
It's
It changed.
It's
Look,
an interesting collection of anecdotes.
Yeah.
You know.
and you're like, all right, I want to test this
Yeah.
on
I want to
myself.
test it on myself.
That's
And I had positive, and then
In
my
fact,
experience
yeah,
is like, yeah, okay, interesting.
that actually pushed
Right?
me in the right direction.
pushed me in the right direction.
Um,
And just in the same way that like a colleague
What-
telling me
what-
like, no, a colleague can tell me at work, I tried this
Right.
in this scenario, and I tried too, and they're
yeah,
like, yeah, great.
it fucking worked.
Yeah.
It's like the amount of stuff.
And
the amount of stuff that you've told
and
me.
guess what? You can that is in the published literature. It's called a case report,
Right.
Or even a case series.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
So
but it doesn't. But it's. Yeah.
I don't know what that process is called.
I know.
actually don't know
Yeah,
how to name
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
But
That's the
it's an
problem.
enormously valuable.
Very valuable.
It's an enormously
Yeah.
valuable thing that humans do.
Yeah.
And
It's true.
You could plausibly call it some version of, but it's not.
We
it's
only
not
ha-
science.
yeah, I know, we only
it's
have-
just not science.
We
it's
have
like
the problem is with science we have one word that
It
ranges from like
No.
the actual form, like the scientific
Yeah,
process
the
and the way
schism.
and it gets misapplied, and then it gets
and that's where I think
and,
that's
and
where
I think what annoys me is when it gets packaged and resold and then presented, and people are making a living
Yeah.
off of
trust in the science.
Yeah,
trust in the science.
science. They're packaging and reselling it into sound bites, or like, here's how
Yeah,
you do
yeah.
it. Here's how you know.
Yeah.
Here's how you
I have the truth.
I have the truth.
The truth.
I have,
and this is
I
the
have
problem.
the fucking answers.
This is the problem. This
and
is the
it,
this
and
is
it gets
the problem.
sold and presented that way. And,
This is the problem. Is
and it's
science, real fucking science, is the biggest gun we've invented to decipher truth about stuff.
well about
It's
rea-
our-
about reality.
About reality.
About
It's
reality.
It's the biggest thing we've ever invented, and it works. It's the best. It's it's insane that we've
Yeah, yeah. Got us here, yeah.
and
in a lot of ways.
to say that these other processes, even though I find them enormously valuable, I engage in them all the time, and in fact, I use them day to day. I use them more than I use science.
Yeah.
Calling them the same thing as the big fucking gun
Yeah.
it's disrespectful to the big gun. It's used to package.
Well, and they don't know they're doing it in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? Like realistically, they don't have.
Okay, yeah,
your,
sure.
Your average science-based YouTuber has. They just don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
I agree, but I still. What do you do then?
Yeah, I don't know.
You
come on. You come on here and you ran for 3 hours.
You spaz in the woods for 3 fucking hours to try to figure out some way of saying that, like, stop disrespecting the big gun. You know what I mean? I love the little guns.
And there's lots. Yeah.
I use the little guns all the time. I love the little guns more than the big gun. In terms of like day to day. but stop fucking with the big gun. Like, it's there for a reason.
Well, and when somebody who is essentially scientifically illiterate asks me for my reference, right? That gets me, right? Because they don't know what science is. Anybody who asks me for my reference doesn't know they don't know what science is.
Yeah.
You never asked me.
Yeah, I don't,
Like
I don't care.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't matter
because you know exactly.
Like I know it. I don't exactly know how to.
I know. Yeah.
I don't know how you precisely say what that is.
Because you can be expert in something. You know,
Right.
you can have.
You can form.
You can be an expert sword maker. Like
Yeah.
you're making fine Japanese swords.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's passed down
who's
through the centuries.
Yeah.
No, and they make a beautiful end product.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no reference for any of that,
Yeah. Totally.
right?
And you know.
And they're interacting with reality. They're forging the metal in
Yeah.
a particular way.
Yeah.
Like
And it works. It's predictable.
And it works. It's predictable. They have a system.
Yeah. It's like who's the master sword maker in Kill Bill?
I don't know.
Fuck it. No, the Hanzori or whatever. It's like going up to him and being like, "Sick sword. Where's the reference, bro?"
Yeah.
It's like
Yes. Yeah.
that motherfucker would behead you. You should be
no,
beheaded.
He wouldn't. He would just be like,
Yeah.
"Ugh." But yeah, exactly.
Hattori Hanzo or
right?
whatever?
Because that is what we're getting at. It's that like I know that professionally. I know that personally. We all know that.
Well,
like there are.
Me and you have both seen what happens when the big
You
guy
can be a fine chef. You
Yeah.
can be a sword maker. You can be an anesthesiologist. These are areas of doing in crafts. You know, like I don't know if I'm struggling for the word, but
Well,
it's a system of knowing that has predictable results and delivers a consistent end product that's valued by people.
right.
But it isn't.
But it isn't science.
But it isn't science.
Yeah. And the reason we
And
know
asking a fine chef for his fucking
his
his
references.
PubMed references, or asking
Yeah.
a samurai sword maker,
It's
or
here's the problem.
or asking me for a reference as to like why I chose 50 milligrams of propofol and not 80.
Yeah, it's like
Like, there's no references.
it's just a clear indicator
Yeah.
that you don't understand.
You
the
don't
problem.
understand. You don't understand reality.
You know, and
well,
you
you
just-
you don't know what science is.
You get kicked out of the kitchen. You get
Yeah.
beheaded. You know, it's like you get yelled at on YouTube comment sections. You know.
Yeah,
It's
and there's an implicit understanding in all of those disciplines as well.
Yeah.
And there are questions you could answer in the kitchen, you know,
right.
with
and
the,
so this
with
is
the scientific
right.
method.
So this is the thing that
And
I
there are
wanted to
questions
get
that
at.
we answer with the scientific method.
And this is what look.
And there are questions in exercise training that you could potentially
I've seen
apply.
what happens when the big gun gets narrowed onto something.
Yeah.
That problem gets fucking solved, right? More or less.
Well,
maybe
yeah.
it takes 10 years,
Yeah.
but that
Well,
problem, or
yeah.
20 years,
Yeah.
30 years, the problem gets solved eventually, right? The big gun is good. It works. But it's not, it's different from what you use every day. It just is. And it's
And the thing is that I know when I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. I know when I'm engaging in the samurai sword making,
yeah.
or when I'm or when I'm
Right.
I'm doing.
Right, and so this is the problem is, I guess, fundamentally is if you understand both ways of
Exactly.
knowing something,
Yeah. And someone's
you're totally happy when you use
either whatever tool is appropriate.
whatever tool is appropriate.
And you know
is
the
what you
limitations
use.
of your tools.
Yeah,
I know
totally.
like we've discussed
yeah.
at length the limitations of the scientific method to answer messy questions in the
totally.
in the biological realm
Yeah.
when you're looking at outcome data
Yeah,
for
I mean,
complex
well,
systems.
and that's like that's a craftsman knows his fucking tools.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how you know.
And so I know which questions
Yeah.
that's appropriate to, and
Yeah.
I know the limitations of
Yeah.
those tools.
Yeah.
And so when you encounter evidence,
yeah.
somebody else's attempt at science,
Yeah.
and you know the limitations, you can look at it and be like, well, can this possibly answer? You know what I mean? Can this possibly answer the question that I'm interested in?
Right.
And the answer is sometimes just no. It's
a lot of
yeah,
an enormous amount of the time, you look at it and even if they're right, they got lucky.
exactly.
You know, and I can't evaluate the rightness or wrongness.
Because it wasn't the
It's
right tool
just-
to answer the question.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You've used papers as
Yeah.
things to follow.
Yeah.
I've
Well,
used
I mean,
papers
yeah,
as things
exactly,
to follow.
yeah.
They're recipes.
Yep.
you know.
Yeah, the rest, exactly. There's a huge amount of value and experience that's just being thrown out the window because people are demanding, like, well, where's your reference for that? It's like, well, you know what? If Dave Graham tells me, like, some, sick trick that, like, really helped him, I'd be really interested in that.
Yeah,
Right?
100%.
And I'm not going to throw it out.
Well, it's
And in fact,
okay.
and in fact,
if Dave Graham was here, and I would every single fucking tactical, like,
yeah.
spiderweb thing he did, I would be like obsessively noting down in the notebook.
And I would test it on myself.
I would test it on myself, and it would be insane to be like, well, where's your reference for that?
Yeah.
It's like asking Jen her reference for misting
Yes.
salt water on the holes.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
there is no reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Try it once. You're going to fucking know the it's like,
Yeah. It's knowable.
yeah. It's,
The effect size is large,
yeah.
but proving it expensive.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I guess
ultimately,
that's like,
that's what it comes down to.
Right. The effect size is large, but proving it is expensive.
And the half measures, the poorly conducted small scale studies, they're no more convincing to me than the anecdote because
they're not an increment. They're
exactly,
a nothing.
They're a nothing.
And I know that's.
And sometimes
I know that's hard to say.
Well, and it's a case by case thing because, like I said, sometimes they are interesting, but many times they're not.
Well,
And that's why. And that's so.
When they're interesting for a process that's not science.
Exactly.
Exactly. And in the currency of science, in the currency of science, they are counterfeit. But that doesn't make them completely, useless. But it's not proof in the same way it's presented as proof.
Exactly. Well, because you said it's a recipe, even when you're doing real science.
Right. Yeah. It's a.
Well, even when you're real science, even when you're using methods that are appropriate for evaluating the level of complexity of the model that you're working in.
Yeah.
And which in many cases, like, there's a total mismatch there, and that's what
right.
we're riling against,
yeah,
right?
We're
a mismatch
about...
between the methods, and a mismatch between the methods that are being brought to bear on the level of complexity of the question that's being asked.
Yeah, because we know what a match looks like.
Exactly.
In like great detail.
Yeah.
And we've seen, some cases where.
Where's your where's your EMG study?
Yeah, right. It's like.
You guys don't. I mean, whoever published that.
Well, it's
doesn't actually understand.
Yeah.
Even the first principles.
Right. Exactly. I mean.
And it got published.
Yeah. Of course it did.
Yeah, of course it did.
Look, I'm
exactly.
telling you.
I know.
Like,
I know. Because it's a total.
Look.
Yeah.
If you have a paper and you've got some cash, it's getting published. Like someone there, you will find someone scrupulous who's happy to wear science as a skin suit and take your money for your increment of evidence.
Right. And then there's another dude who's happy to take that dude's
increment of evidence and turn it into YouTube money.
Turn it into a YouTube money.
And the whole gruesome train. The whole gruesome train.
The Human Centipede. You see that movie?
Yeah, right. It is a human centipede. It's a gruesome train, and like, look, if you want to be part of the human centipede, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? It takes for us to go
What's
up.
No. The vanilla paste or the cuttlefish? Okay, the cuttlefish.
For us to go up another Kardashev, level, we're going to need a lot of humans.
Yep.
Some of them might want to be part of the science centipede, and that's okay with me, right? The human centipede science, like whatever you would call that.
Yeah.
That's fine with me. I mean, I don't want to be. And when a human centipede guy says to me, "Where's your references?" I can't really take it seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't want to be the first. That's like asking me if I want vanilla paste or cuttlefish.
Yeah.
It's
totally.
like no.
I don't want.
I don't want another person sewn to my ass. I don't want to partake.
Yeah.
You know what? I would die of a hunger strike. rather than that's the thing, right? In the
Yeah,
South
yeah,
Park
yeah,
episode,
right,
it's
yeah.
like you were cuttlefish or vanilla paste.
Yeah.
The honorable thing to do is to just die of a hunger strike,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
you
yeah.
have, you know,
Yeah.
and not partake in that.
Yeah, it's you know, the only winning move is not to play,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And like I ain't playing.
Yeah.
That's, you know,
All right, man.
yeah. Call it a
Fuck out
day.
of here.